After that statement in court, the room no longer felt neutral. It was subtle at first. Not a sound, not a movement anyone could point to. Just a shift, like air pressure changing before a storm. The courtroom, moments ago, balanced and procedural, seemed to lean in a direction no one had voted on. The kind of lean that didn't announce itself, but once felt, couldn't be ignored. The deputy stepped down from the witness stand with the confidence of a man who believed the hardest part was over. His shoulders were relaxed, his jaw set. He didn't look at the jury as if he feared them. He looked at them as if he owned their conclusion already. Years of testimony had taught him how these rooms worked. Say the right things, in the right tone, and the room would follow. And it had. At least, that's what he believed. The prosecutor's pen hovered midair, then slowly touched the page. A juror in the second row crossed her arms, her mouth tightening without her realizing it. Another juror leaned back, eyes no longer on the deputy, but drifting instead toward the defense table. The judge paused in her note-taking, just for a second, long enough to reread the last line she had written, as if wondering whether it still fit. The room had chosen a posture. And it wasn't neutral anymore. At the defendant's table, the woman in the orange jumpsuit did nothing. Iris sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her, wrists resting on the worn wood as if they belonged there. She didn't react. No widening of the eyes, no shake of the head, no protest. If someone had walked in at that exact moment, they might have assumed she hadn't heard a word. But she had. She had heard everything, and she understood something the rest of the room did not yet grasp. Silence, in moments like this, was not weakness. It was restraint. The bailiff shifted his weight near the wall, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. Even the ceiling fan seemed louder now, its slow rotation cutting through the thickened air. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances, the kind that asked a question without forming one. Is this how it's supposed to feel? The deputy adjusted his uniform as he returned to his seat, a small, satisfied motion. He didn't look at Iris. He didn't need to. In his mind, she was already where she belonged, a name on a docket, a story simplified into something manageable. He had spoken. The system would do the rest. He leaned toward the prosecutor and murmured something under his breath. The prosecutor nodded, though his eyes lingered on the defense table a moment longer than necessary. He couldn't explain why. Just a flicker of discomfort, quickly buried. Trials moved forward. Feelings didn't matter. Across the aisle, Iris felt the eyes now. Not hostile, not sympathetic either. Curious, measuring. The kind of looks people give when they think they understand a situation, then realize they might not. She kept her gaze forward, fixed on a spot just above the judge's bench. She had learned long ago that flinching invited conclusions. The judge cleared her throat, the sound sharper than intended. "Proceed," she said, though nothing had actually stopped. The word landed heavier than it should have. Proceed where exactly? Somewhere behind Iris, a man in the gallery shook his head slowly. He didn't know her, had never seen her before today. Still, something about the way the room had tilted unsettled him. He couldn't say why, only that it felt like watching a door close without knowing who had turned the lock. The deputy sat back, arms relaxed, confidence intact. He believed the moment had passed, that whatever weight had entered the room belonged to the defendant now, not to him. That justice, as he understood it, had spoken clearly and would soon move on. He didn't see it. The way neutrality had cracked, the way certainty had overreached. No one announced it. No gavel marked the instant, but something irreversible had begun. And while no one in that courtroom yet knew who was telling the truth and who wasn't, one thing was unmistakable. Justice had just been bent. The room could feel it. 3 months earlier, Whitmore County looked like the kind of place people trusted without thinking twice. It sat in the middle of the country, surrounded by flat farmland that stretched until the horizon blurred into sky. 2-lane roads cut through cornfields and soybeans. Church signs advertised potlucks and revival nights. On Friday evenings, the high school football stadium glowed like a lighthouse, pulling the whole town toward it. People waved at passing cars even when they didn't recognize the driver. In Whitmore County, familiarity was assumed. So was safety. And so were the police. Here, deputies weren't just law enforcement, they were neighbors. They coached Little League. They showed up at 4th of July barbecues in uniform and were handed burgers without asking. When a patrol car rolled by, people felt reassured, not nervous. The badge still meant something here, or at least people believed it did. Deputy Kyle Brennan believed it more than anyone. 15 years on the force had given him more than a pension plan and a row of commendations. It had given him confidence that bordered on certainty. He knew these roads, he knew these people, and he believed he knew trouble when he saw it. His office at the sheriff's department reflected that belief. Framed photos of handshakes with mayors and county commissioners lined the wall. A plaque naming him Deputy of the Year hung slightly crooked above his desk. He never bothered to straighten it. Everyone already knew. Brennan walked through the station like a man who belonged there permanently. New deputies deferred to him. Older ones backed him without question. When he spoke in briefings, people listened. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't have to. "This county's changing," he liked to say, usually in the break room, coffee in hand. "You let things slide, they spread. You stay sharp, you keep it clean." Most nodded. A few laughed. No one challenged him. The system didn't ask him to prove himself anymore. It trusted him by default. Complaints came in, sure. They always did. Mostly from the same neighborhoods. Mostly from people without influence or money or the right last names. The paperwork made its rounds. Internal review. No violation found. Case closed. Sheriff Wayne Decker signed off on those reports the way a man signs receipts. Quickly, without reading closely, Brennan delivered results, arrests, convictions, numbers that looked good at election time. That was what mattered. In the patrol car, Brennan talked freely about instincts, about patterns, about knowing who didn't belong. His partner that summer, Deputy Megan Holt, listened more than she spoke. She was younger, still careful with her words, still believed the badge meant responsibility, not just authority. Sometimes she noticed things. The way Brennan decided who to follow before they did anything wrong. The way his tone changed depending on the driver. The way his body camera seemed to fail at inconvenient moments. It made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite articulate. One afternoon, as they sat parked near a closed grain elevator, Holt finally said something. "You ever worry we're pushing it too far?" Her voice was quiet, almost casual. Brennan smirked, eyes still on the road. "Worry is for people who don't know what they're doing." She looked at him, waiting. He didn't look back. "Look," he continued softer now, like he was offering advice. "If you do your job right, the system protects you. Always has. Always will." Holt nodded. She told herself he was right. That experience counted for something. That questioning him would only make things harder. She had a mortgage, 2 kids, a future she didn't want to jeopardize over a feeling she couldn't prove. So she stayed quiet. And the system rewarded that silence. Every report Brennan filed was accepted. Every arrest stood. Every complaint faded into a drawer no one opened anymore. Each clean outcome reinforced the same belief. He was untouchable because he was correct. And he was correct because the system said so. On late nights, Brennan liked to park on County Road 12, a long, empty stretch where the speed limit never seemed to matter and the road disappeared into darkness. He would sit there with the engine idling, headlights off, waiting, confident, patient. In his mind, nothing bad ever happened to men who were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. The road ahead was empty. The patrol car waited. The night it happened didn't feel important at first. It was one of those evenings that slipped by without leaving a mark on the calendar. Early fall in Whitmore County. The air had cooled just enough to make open windows comfortable. The sky was clear, the moon thin and distant, barely lighting the long stretch of County Road 12. Iris drove the same way she always did. Her hands rested steady on the wheel. Speed just under the limit. Headlights on. Turn signal early. Deliberate. Every movement measured, not out of fear, but intention. She had learned long ago that attention, not speed, was what kept you safe, or at least what passed for safe. She saw the patrol car before it saw her, parked in the gravel turnout, half hidden by a line of trees. Engine off. Lights dark. Waiting. She kept driving. In the side mirror, the car pulled out slowly, falling in behind her at a distance that felt practiced. Not close enough to alarm, not far enough to miss anything. Iris's heartbeat picked up, not from panic, but from recognition. This was how it always started. Probability, not fate. The lights came on a moment later, red and blue, brief and decisive. She signaled, slowed, pulled over carefully. parked, both hands on the steering wheel, visible. The routine settled over her like muscle memory. Calm was not something she forced. It was something she carried. Footsteps on gravel, a shadow at her window. The beam of a flashlight cut across her face. License and registration. The voice was firm, unhurried, familiar in tone even if the man himself was not yet. Iris turned her head slightly. "Good evening, officer," she said evenly. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" The pause was almost imperceptible, just long enough to register annoyance. "License and registration." "Yes, sir. I'm going to reach for my purse. It's on the passenger seat." She moved slowly. Brennan watched her hands, his expression unreadable. When she handed him the documents, he glanced at the name, then back at her. Something in his posture shifted. Not aggression, assessment. He looked past her, into the car, then back again. "Step out of the vehicle." "Is there a reason, officer?" Her voice didn't change. No challenge, just a question. "I'm smelling marijuana." There it was. Said casually. Practiced, like a box checked on a mental list. "I don't use any substances," Iris replied. "You won't find anything." He smiled slightly, not amused. "Certain." "Step out of the vehicle." She complied, slowly, hands visible, standing beside the car as the patrol lights washed the road in color. The world narrowed to the sound of the engine idling and the wind moving through the fields. Brennan circled her, eyes sharp. "You're awfully calm," he said. "Most people get nervous." "I have nothing to hide." That's what they all say. In his mind, the story was already forming. The signs, the tone, the calm that didn't fit. Experience told him what it meant. He trusted that experience. It had never failed him before. He gestured toward the car. "You won't mind if I take a look." Am I required to consent? That question irritated him more than he expected. People didn't usually know to ask, or they did, and were trying to play smart. "I have probable cause," he said. "The odor gives me the right." He didn't wait for her response. He opened the door and began searching, methodical and quick. Papers hit the ground. The contents of her purse spilled onto the gravel. Ordinary things, receipts, a pen, nothing remarkable. Iris watched quietly. Every movement he made followed a rhythm she recognized. Not sloppy, not rushed, confident, as if his hands already knew what they were going to find. Under the passenger seat, his motion changed. Subtle, smooth. Too smooth to draw attention. When he stood, a small plastic bag hung between his fingers, catching the light. "Well," he said softly, "look at that." Iris's stomach tightened, but her face remained still. "That's not mine." He met her eyes. There was no anger there, only satisfaction. Funny how that works. In that moment, nothing dramatic happened. No shouting, no struggle, no raised voices echoing into the night. Just a decision completed. From the outside, it looked like another routine stop on an empty road. Another deputy doing his job. Another woman standing quietly under flashing lights. But somewhere between his certainty and her silence, a line had been crossed, and neither of them would be able to step back over it. The moment lingered longer than it should have. The bag in his hand was small, light, ordinary, the kind of thing that had ended lives without ever looking dangerous. Brennan let it hang there between them, not for proof, but for effect. He had learned that silence worked better than threats. Iris stared at it, then back at him. "I've never seen that before." "That's usually how it goes," he replied. His tone wasn't cruel. It was instructional, like he was explaining gravity to someone who kept insisting they could float. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know what this is going to look like, right?" She said nothing. In his mind, that silence confirmed everything. Innocent people argued. Guilty ones went quiet once they realized the story had already been written. He had seen it dozens of times. He trusted the pattern more than the person standing in front of him. A second patrol car pulled up behind them. The crunch of gravel announced Deputy Megan Holt before she spoke. "What have you got?" Brennan didn't look back. "Possession. Possibly intent." Holt's eyes moved from the bag to Iris, then back again. Something about the scene felt off. Not wrong enough to name. Just misaligned. Iris's posture, her calm, the way Brennan's confidence seemed rehearsed. "Did you get consent?" Holt asked. "Didn't need it," Brennan said. "Probable cause." Holt nodded, though the words settled uneasily in her chest. She caught Iris's eye for a brief second. There was no plea there, no fear, just focus, like she was watching something unfold exactly as expected. That unsettled Holt. More than tears would have. Brennan turned back to Iris. "Hands behind your back." "Officer," she said evenly, "you're making a mistake." The words didn't land as a warning. They landed as information. He tightened his jaw. "Turn around." The cuffs clicked shut, sharp and final, too tight. He didn't notice, or didn't care. He guided her toward the patrol car, already reciting the steps in his head. Report, booking, court date, another clean arrest. As he opened the back door, he leaned in slightly. "You should have known better," he said. "This isn't a city where you can get away with things." She met his eyes. "Neither is this." For the first time that night, something flickered across his face. Not doubt. Annoyance. He slammed the door harder than necessary and turned away. Holt watched him walk back to the road, pulling out his notepad. Writing came easily to him. The words flowed the way they always did. Erratic driving. Odor detected. Suspect uncooperative. Substance recovered. Facts. As he saw them. In the back seat, Iris stared out the window as the car pulled away. Fields slid past in darkness. Ordinary. Quiet. If anyone had driven by, they would have seen nothing unusual, just a patrol car heading toward town. She shifted slightly, feeling the pressure of the cuffs. Not pain. Proof. Proof that the choice had been made. Brennan drove with one hand on the wheel, relaxed. He felt steady, certain. Another stop concluded the right way. Another reminder that instincts mattered more than paperwork. He didn't know that hours earlier, her car had been clean. Verified. Documented. He didn't know that her calm wasn't resignation but patience. He only knew that everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to. And that was enough. As they disappeared down County Road 12, the patrol lights faded into the distance, leaving the road empty again. Silent, unchanged, but the line had already been crossed, and nothing, after that night, would ever be routine again. By morning, Iris Spencer had become paperwork. Her name was typed into a system that didn't pause to wonder who she was before the arrest or who she might be after. Fingerprints rolled, a photograph taken under harsh fluorescent lights, personal belongings sealed into a clear plastic bag and slid across a counter without ceremony. Phone, wallet, keys, the small necklace she never took off. No one asked about it. No one asked about her. She was given an orange jumpsuit that didn't quite fit and escorted down a hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old concrete. Doors opened and closed behind her with practiced indifference. The sound echoed longer than necessary. In the holding cell, she sat on a narrow bench and waited. Other women glanced at her briefly, then looked away. Everyone understood the unspoken rule. Don't ask. Don't attach. In places like this, stories were liabilities. When her name was finally called for processing, the deputy reading it mispronounced it. Iris didn't correct him. Correcting people had never changed outcomes. At her arraignment, the courtroom felt smaller than it had the night before. Less air, less curiosity. The prosecutor spoke as if reciting a grocery list. Charges, bail recommendation, risk assessment. Iris stood beside a public defender she had just met. Hands folded, eyes forward. No one asked why she was so calm. Bail was set high. High enough to keep her in place. High enough to move the case along efficiently. The gavel came down. Next case. She was led away again, another quiet figure swallowed by the system. To everyone watching, she was exactly what the paperwork said she was. Another statistic. Another number in a county that prided itself on order. Across town, Deputy Kyle Brennan started his shift like any other. He grabbed coffee from the break room, exchanged jokes with a dispatcher, checked his patrol route. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. "Nice catch last night," a fellow deputy said. "About time someone cracked down on that stretch." Brennan smiled. "Just doing my job." The arrest report had already been approved. No questions, no notes in the margins. The sheriff glanced at it between meetings and signed off without slowing down. Results were results. By lunchtime, Brennan had been mentioned twice in casual conversation, cleaning things up, keeping the roads safe. The familiar praise settled easily on him. It always had. He didn't think about the woman in the holding cell. There was no reason to. The system had taken over now. That was the beauty of it. Once the gears started turning, individual faces blurred into process. Deputy Megan Holt tried to focus on her own work, but the night replayed itself without permission. The way Brennan's hand had moved, the way Iris had stood there, quiet, unafraid, the way the bag had appeared. At home that evening, Holt lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. She checked the clock. 1:30, 2:45. She closed her eyes and saw the scene again. In the patrol car the next day, Brennan talked like nothing had happened. Weekend plans, department rumors, another stop he'd made that morning. Holt responded when necessary, laughed when expected. "You all right?" he asked at one point, glancing over. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," she said. He nodded. "You'll get used to it." That night, Holt sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. She hesitated before clicking into the system. Her dash cam footage loaded slowly. She watched the stop again. Then again, frame by frame. There it was, the movement she couldn't forget. Clearer now, undeniable. Her stomach dropped. She closed the laptop hard, as if that could erase what she'd seen. Her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. She ignored it. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, Holt realized she was holding her breath. In the jail, Iris lay on a thin mattress staring at the ceiling. The noise of the facility never fully stopped. Doors, voices, footsteps. She counted them without meaning to. Time moved differently here. No one asked her who she was. No one asked what really happened on that road. And outside, the county moved on, convinced everything was exactly where it belonged. Something was slipping. Slowly, quietly. Everyone could feel it. No one was ready to say it out loud. The case moved the way cases always moved in Whitmore County. Quickly, quietly, without resistance. 3 days after the arrest, Iris stood in front of the judge again. Same courtroom, same flag behind the bench, same rhythm of names being called and lives being measured in minutes. When her turn came, the prosecutor stepped forward with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, the state requests bail in the amount of $50,000. The number landed harder than it should have. It was high for the charge. Everyone in the room knew it, but no one reacted. "She's a recent arrival to the county," the prosecutor continued. "No family here, limited ties, significant flight risk." Iris kept her eyes forward, the words stacked neatly on top of each other, forming a version of her that existed only on paper. The judge glanced down briefly. "Bail is set at $50,000. The gavel came down. Next case. No one asked if the number made sense. No one asked how a woman in an orange jumpsuit was supposed to produce it. The system didn't concern itself with how things felt, only with how they moved. Back in the holding area, Iris sat across from her appointed public defender, Raymond Brooks. He looked tired in a way that came from repetition, not age. The file in front of him was already thick with assumptions. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said quietly, lowering his voice, even though no one else was listening. "Deputy Brennan carries weight in this county. Judges trust him. Juries trust him. Without something concrete to challenge his testimony, this is an uphill fight." She studied his face. "What if his testimony isn't true?" Brooks exhaled. "Then we'd need proof." "I understand." He hesitated, then nodded, already moving on in his mind to the next case. Experience had taught him not to hope too much. Hope made losing harder. Alone again, Iris felt the pressure settle in deeper, not panic, something heavier. The slow anger that came from knowing exactly how the machine worked and feeling it close around you anyway. The fear wasn't dramatic, it was practical. How long? How much? What gets taken? That doesn't come back. Across town, Deputy Brennan felt none of that weight. He sat at his kitchen table one evening, paperwork spread neatly in front of him. He filled in the report with ease, his pen moving confidently. Dates, times, observations. He had written this story many times before. Each time it held. He practiced his testimony out loud once, then again silently. Not because he was nervous, because he was thorough. Preparation was professionalism. He believed that. In the station, the case was already being discussed as a done deal. The prosecutor mentioned it in passing. "Open and shut," he said. "Good work." Brennan nodded. Just another day. The system moved together, each part reinforcing the other. Police reports became charging documents. Charging documents became court schedules. Court schedules became convictions. No one had to coordinate. The rhythm had been established long before. Deputy Holt watched it happen from the edges. She hadn't slept well since the arrest. Every time she closed her eyes, the image returned. The movement, the bag, the certainty in Brennan's voice. She told herself it wasn't her place, that questioning him now would only make things worse. Still, when she saw Brennan reviewing notes in the break room, something twisted in her chest. "Court's next week," he said casually, catching her glance. "Should be quick." She nodded. "Yeah." He smiled. "Don't worry, it always works out." That night, Holt opened her laptop again. The footage was still there, untouched, waiting. She hovered over the trackpad, heart pounding, then closed it without pressing play. In the jail, Iris folded her blanket carefully at the end of the day. Routine gave structure to waiting. She thought about the courtroom, about the way the air had shifted during her last appearance, about the looks that lingered just a second longer than before. The case was moving forward, unstoppable, efficient. It felt like every other case, until it wouldn't. And as the date approached, the courthouse prepared itself for another ordinary morning. The courtroom filled the way it always did on trial mornings. Quiet footsteps, low voices, the rustle of paper. Nothing about it suggested history was about to bend. Deputy Kyle Brennan took the stand with the ease of a man stepping into familiar ground. He straightened his uniform, raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth. His voice was steady, confident. He had done this before, many times. When he began to speak, the room leaned toward him without realizing it. He described the traffic stop in clean, professional language. Routine patrol, suspicious behavior, training and experience guiding his judgment. Each sentence landed exactly where it was supposed to. Heads nodded, pens moved. Then he said it. Not loudly, not angrily, just casually, as if it explained everything that came before it and everything that would come after. It was the kind of statement that pretended to be observation, but carried the weight of judgment. A sentence built on years of assumptions, of patterns he believed in more than people. After that statement in court, the room no longer felt neutral. The shift was immediate and undeniable. A juror's brow furrowed. The prosecutor's pen stopped mid-word. Even the judge looked up fully this time, her expression no longer procedural, but alert. Brennan didn't notice, or if he did, he misunderstood it. He thought the room had moved toward him, toward certainty. At the defense table, Iris Spencer remained still. She did not react to the words, did not flinch, did not look away. Her face held the same calm it always had. But this time, it read differently. No longer passive. Now it looked deliberate. Raymond Brooks stood slowly. "Deputy Brennan," he said evenly, "you've testified that your conclusion was based on experience." "Yes." "And how many years of experience did you say you had?" 15. Brooks nodded. "So when you say you know a certain type when you see one, you're asking this court to trust that instinct." "That's correct." Brooks paused. Then he reached into his folder. "Your Honor," he said, "before I continue, the defense requests permission to submit additional information regarding the defendant's identity." The prosecutor frowned. "Relevance?" The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." Brooks turned slightly, just enough for Iris to see him. She gave a single, subtle nod. He faced the court again. "The woman sitting at this table is not who she appears to be in the charging documents," he said. "Not because those documents are wrong, but because they are incomplete." A murmur moved through the gallery. "My client is not unemployed. She is not transient. She is not without ties." Brennan shifted in his seat for the first time. Brooks continued, his voice calm but firm. "My client is Special Agent Iris Elaine Spencer, 12-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Civil Rights Division." The silence that followed was not empty. It was stunned. The judge froze. The prosecutor stood halfway out of his chair, then sat back down. In the gallery, someone whispered, then stopped themselves. Brennan stared at Iris. She met his eyes at last, not with anger, not with triumph, with understanding. Brooks let the words settle before continuing. Agent Spencer was assigned to this county as part of a federal investigation into patterns of misconduct, including evidence tampering, including perjury, including arrests based not on law, but on assumption. Brennan shook his head slowly. "That's not possible." "It is," Brooks said, "and it's documented." He handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. She opened it, read briefly, then looked up again. Her expression altered completely. "Deputy Brennan," she said carefully, "were you aware that the defendant's vehicle had been inspected by federal technicians hours before the stop?"
Next.
"No," Brennan said, his voice tight. "Were you aware," Brooks added, "that the stop was recorded from more than one angle?" The room held its breath. The truth did not arrive like an explosion. Arrived like light, quiet, relentless, revealing everything it touched. Brennan's certainty began to unravel, not because he suddenly saw himself as a villain, but because he realized something worse. He had believed he was right. He had believed the system would protect him because he was acting in good faith, because his instincts were trusted, because no one had ever challenged them successfully. And now, standing in a room that no longer leaned his way, he understood that belief had blinded him. The judge called a recess. The gavel struck harder than usual. As people stood and whispered and rushed for the doors, Iris remained seated for a moment longer. The weight of the room had shifted again, not toward her, toward the truth. She rose calmly, adjusted her jacket, and followed her attorney out. Behind her, Brennan sat alone. The system he had trusted was still there, but it was no longer shielding him. And in that moment, the real tragedy became clear. Not that the truth had been hidden, but that it had only been believed after it had already caused harm. The consequences did not arrive with sirens. They arrived quietly, one absence at a time. By the next morning, Kyle Brennan's name was no longer spoken the way it had been for years. It still appeared on paperwork, still existed in digital systems, but the tone had changed. Where there had once been certainty, there was now distance. At the sheriff's department, his chair sat empty during roll call. No announcement was made, no explanation offered. People noticed anyway. They always did. Conversations paused when someone realized the seat hadn't been filled. A few deputies avoided looking at it altogether, as if eye contact might force them to acknowledge what it meant. The badge came off his uniform in a small office with the door closed. There were no cameras, no raised voices, just a supervisor clearing his throat and sliding a form across the desk. Brennan signed it without protest. His hand didn't shake. He had spent years believing that professionalism meant control. He wasn't about to lose that now. When he stepped back into the hallway, the looks followed him. Not hostile. Worse, uncertain. A dispatcher who used to smile looked down at her screen. A deputy he had trained nodded stiffly, then turned away. The respect he had worn so easily had not vanished in anger. It had dissolved into something colder. Doubt. By afternoon, the framed commendations were gone from the wall. Someone else had taken them down. No one asked where they went. In town, word spread the way it always did. Through pauses in conversation, through lowered voices at the diner, through the way people stopped mid-sentence when a patrol car passed. The same neighbors who once waved now watched more carefully. At the courthouse, the courtroom looked the same. Same benches, same seal on the wall. But something fundamental had shifted. The air no longer carried automatic trust. Questions lingered where assumptions used to live. Iris Spencer walked through the side exit without drawing attention. No one stopped her. No one applauded. There was no moment of triumph waiting on the courthouse steps. Just daylight and a quiet street. She pulled her jacket tighter and kept moving. For her, the end of the case was not a victory. It was a correction. Necessary. Long overdue. She did not look back at the building. There was nothing there she needed to see again. Inside, Kyle Brennan sat alone in a small room, hands folded, staring at a blank wall. The uniform he had worn with pride hung unused. The authority he had relied on no longer answered when he called for it. He had not been dragged away. He had not been shouted down. He had simply been removed. And that, more than any punishment he had imagined, unsettled him. Because power, once unquestioned, was gone. And in its place was something far more uncomfortable. Reflection. The system that had lifted him had not disappeared. It still stood. But now it was forced to look at the shape it had taken. One man had lost his position, and an entire institution had lost the comfort of not asking why. Life in Whitmore County did not stop. The roads were still empty in the early mornings. County Road 12 stretched the same way it always had, flat and quiet, bordered by fields that moved with the wind. Pickup trucks passed each other with polite nods. The high school lights still came on Friday nights. Church bells still rang on Sundays. From the outside, nothing looked different, but no one saw it the same way anymore. People noticed patrol cars now, not with fear, Not with hatred, with awareness. The automatic comfort was gone, replaced by something heavier: thought. When a deputy walked into the diner, conversations continued, but more carefully. Eyes followed longer. Questions formed silently and stayed there. The town had learned something it couldn't unlearn. In the sheriff's department, new procedures were introduced. Meetings were longer. Paperwork took more time. Body cameras were checked twice. Words like accountability and oversight were spoken aloud, no longer treated as accusations. Some deputies welcomed it. Others resented it quietly, but all of them felt the shift. The system still existed. It just no longer pretended to be infallible. Kyle Brennan no longer drove County Road 12. His house sat the same way it always had, but the pride that once filled it had drained out slowly, replaced by a silence he didn't know how to fill. Friends stopped calling. Not out of anger, but discomfort. It was easier to remember him as he used to be than to confront what he represented now. He told himself he hadn't meant harm, that he had followed instinct, that the system had taught him what to see. Those thoughts came easily. What didn't come easily was peace, because once the room had shifted, it never shifted back. Iris Spencer moved on to her next assignment without ceremony. New town, new desk, new faces. The work continued the same way it always had: methodical, patient, necessary. When asked about Whitmore County, she did not speak about bravery or sacrifice. She spoke about timing. Truth doesn't need volume, she said once. It needs space and the right moment. She did not believe she had changed the world, only that she had interrupted something harmful long enough for others to see it. The people who lived in Whitmore County carried the echo with them, in small ways, in moments they couldn't quite explain, when a complaint was taken seriously for the first time, when a juror hesitated instead of nodding along, when a judge paused before writing the next line. No one became better overnight, but some became awake. And that was enough to matter, because justice, real justice, does not arrive with shouting or spectacle. It arrives quietly, often too late, and leaves behind an uncomfortable clarity. There are rooms that pretend to be neutral, until one sentence exposes what they were leaning toward all along. The story did not end with a verdict, or a headline, or a sentence read aloud in a courtroom. It ended the way most real stories do: slowly, unevenly, in places no one thought to film. Months later, Whitmore County still looked like Whitmore County. The same roads, the same courthouse square, the same sense of familiarity that had once been mistaken for safety. But familiarity no longer meant unquestioned trust. It meant memory. People remembered. They remembered the case not as a scandal, but as a moment when something they had taken for granted cracked just enough to let light through. Conversations changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. At the diner on Main Street, a man who had once waved dismissively at complaints about the sheriff's department now paused before saying, "Well, I'm sure the officer knew what he was doing." He paused because he no longer felt certain, and uncertainty, for the first time, felt responsible. In the courthouse, jurors sat differently now, straighter, more attentive. They listened not just to the confidence in a voice, but to the assumptions beneath it. Judges reread reports more carefully. Prosecutors asked follow-up questions they hadn't bothered with before. The machinery of justice didn't stop, but it slowed just enough to notice itself. That mattered. Kyle Brennan never stood trial in this story's final chapter because the loss that defined him wasn't measured in years behind bars. It was measured in relevance, in the quiet realization that the authority he once wielded so casually had depended entirely on people not looking too closely. When they did, it vanished. He spent long afternoons alone, replaying moments he had once dismissed as routine. Words he had spoken without thought, decisions he had justified as instinct. For the first time in his life, the system did not explain him to himself. He had to do that alone. Some days, he still told himself he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. Other days, he wasn't so sure. Those were harder, those were quieter, and Iris Spencer moved on as she always did. There was another town, another file, another pattern waiting to be documented. She didn't carry Whitmore County with her as a trophy or a burden. She carried it as confirmation. Confirmation that silence can be strategic, that patience can be dangerous to the wrong people, that truth, when spoken at the right moment, doesn't need force to dismantle power built on assumption. She understood something most people didn't want to admit. That justice is rarely about heroes and villains. More often, it is about ordinary people deciding whether to question what feels comfortable. Whitmore County learned that lesson the hard way. No monument was built, no plaque installed. There was no official day of reckoning, just a collective awareness that lingered, impossible to erase. The road where it had all begun remained empty most nights. Cars still passed through without incident. Nothing about it announced what had happened there. But the people who knew, knew. They understood now that systems don't fail all at once. They fail quietly, over time, with the permission of those who benefit from not asking questions. And sometimes the only thing that interrupts that failure is a sentence spoken too plainly to ignore. After that statement in court, the room no longer felt neutral. And long after the courtroom emptied, the echo of that moment continued to do its work.